All righty, so let's get started today. Victoria, did you want to talk about the ASFC first, or do you want me to introduce one?
Sure. Yeah, sure. Thank you. And then I'll pass it back to you. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Today's event is a part of our LGBTQ plus History Month, which is within a series of Heritage Month events that we have from October through June each year. So please take a look at the website, foothill.edu/heritage, for all of the wonderful months and events that we have. We have all of the events listed for this month. We had yesterday, and then right now, and then next week we have an event all week, Monday through Friday. So please check out the either events calendar or the heritage page for that. And these are all student sponsored events that are brought to you by a planning committee, myself being a part of it, Judy, several others, and they're meant to be student led and student run. So we love bringing different events, different speakers to campus, and really honoring the diversity and equity and inclusion in our campus and in our world. And these are all ASFC or Associated Students of Foothill College funded. So thank you to ASFC. Thank you to the students that pay their student rep fees and all of that, because that's what funds all of these. So Judy always does an amazing job of bringing us really, really talented, powerful photographers and photojournalists. And so I'm excited to close out our academic year today with Preston for our virtual artist talk. So thank you again. And I'm Victoria Strelnikova. I'm the student activities coordinator, so I support with all of the Heritage Months, clubs, activities, commencement, New Student Welcome Day, and other events that happen on campus. So in case there are those here that do not know me, but if you have any questions about any of those things or you'd like to get involved on campus, please feel free to reach out to me. And with that, I'll pass it over to Judy. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Victoria, and students, the ASFC organization, for bringing us these incredible artist talks every month of the academic year. And today I'm super excited about it. In honor of LGBTQI plus month is my very dear friend, Preston Gannaway, who I adore. If you can't tell, you will tell by the end of the talk. Preston is an amazing Pulitzer Prize winning documentary photographer. She's also a visual artist based in Northern California, as I mentioned earlier, in Forestville. Her work centers around extremely intimate narratives about families, marginalized groups, and other important topics that examine the relationship between the person, the community, and the landscape in which they interact and engage. She won the Pulitzer Prize in feature photography for her 2008 for in 2008 for her work that she did at it was the Current, right?
Concord Monitor.
Oh, the Concord Monitor. So sorry.
That's okay.
At the Concord Monitor. She actually won it right after we had hired her at the Rocky Mountain News. So her first day was spent at the Rocky was spent on a plane flying to pick up the Pulitzer to get the Pulitzer announcement in the newsroom in New Hampshire. But it was for a body of work she did that she's still working on, actually, that turned into a book entitled Remember Me. And it deals with a family who lost their mother and their life afterwards. Like what happens after a member of a family that important passes on. So, without further ado, you're not here to hear me, you're here to hear Preston. Take it away. And again, thanks for taking your time to do this, Preston. We really appreciate you.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you so much, Judy. And Victoria, it's really great to be here. All right, let me see if I can get this sharing. All right, let's see, and then Okay. Hopefully everybody.
Success, you did it.
It worked. Okay, great. Yeah, I can't see any of you, but I can trust you can see the screen. And there should be plenty of time for questions at the end. But I also don't really mind, if anybody really has a burning question and they want to interject, that's okay too. So today I'm actually going to be showing the Remember Me series that Judy mentioned. And Judy and our friendship and working relationship goes back to the early days of this project. So it's pretty nice to be able to look back and note that Judy was part of this during this whole period of time. And you guys are very lucky to have her
Oh my God.
at Foothill. So what I wanted to do is talk about the beginning of this project and then the creative process of putting the book together, and then also show some newer unpublished work from the past few years. So this is Elijah St. Pierre. Most people call him EJ. And I first met him 20 years ago when he was a rambunctious 4-year-old. He would like run circles around their little suburban New Hampshire home and try to punch me when he passed me. So I was working for a really small newspaper called the Concord Monitor when a reporter and I were just assigned to tell a story of how a young couple was dealing with terminal cancer while raising 3 children. And EJ was the youngest of those three. So this is a photograph I made in September of 2006, almost 20 years ago. And this is EJ at 4 years old. So the Concord Monitor was my first sort of real job as a photojournalist, and I got this assignment just by luck of the draw. But by the time I met Carolyn, who's here on the left, her liver cancer was terminal, and she was enduring aggressive treatments to try to just be around and be as healthy as possible long enough to imprint her children's memories. So the St. Pierre family lived like 2 miles from the newspaper, from the newsroom. So it was pretty easy for me to get over there and spend time. And during afternoons like this one, while the older kids were at school and Rich was off at work, it was really Carolyn who I spent the most time with and became closest to. So this isn't a direct quote per se, but it's kind of a distilled thought by French philosopher Roland Barthes. And I like it a lot because to me, this project is so much about time. It's about their time, it's about my time. It originally started as documenting an effort to gain more time, and then it sort of evolved into a meditation on time itself. So, wanted to touch a little bit on my personal history, and all of these photos I'm showing are from New Hampshire and from this project. But this scene was one that I think was drawn to because it sort of reminded me of my childhood in North Carolina. So I grew up in North Carolina and was always really, pretty good at drawing and painting as an early age, and that was really fundamental to my identity and sense of self. I like wanted to be an artist from the time I was like a little kid. Um, but I started taking photography in high school and really started migrating from traditional arts to photography as a teenager. And I had some fantastic photography instructors um, in college and high school, and that's sort of when I made the leap and changed my major from fine art, from traditional arts to fine art photography. And one of the things that I really liked about photography was being able to work within the parameters of reality. There wasn't this like blank canvas that I had to stare at like in art class. I knew that I could go out and make art based on what was in front of me. So light, color, and especially composition, I think were things that really I was attracted to early on and just sort of made sense to me compared to a lot of other classes I was taking. And documentary photography, I really feel like it's a visual puzzle. And I think it's in a lot of ways a game of organizing visual chaos, which really appeals to me. Okay, so back to EJ and Carolyn. This is Carolyn again shortly before she died. Her husband, Rich, is taking care of her. And I really sort of fell into journalism after graduating from college. Um, it kind of dates me, but when I graduated from college, newspapers were actually like a pretty good way to make a living. And so I ended up just sort of falling into journalism and spent my 20s and 30s, learning journalism, learning photojournalism, sort of slowly working my way up. And I worked on staff at newspapers, kind of bounced across the country, New Hampshire, Colorado, Virginia, twice. Um, and so I did that for like 12 years before settling in California, where I'm now based, as Judy mentioned, in Sonoma County. So since I was raised on community photojournalism, I was really trained just to go out and find stories, like connect with people from all walks of life, and just tell stories about daily life. And I'm so thankful for that now because it really made me not only the photographer, but the person that I am. And just having to go out and photograph, like shoot every day, was just such a fantastic training ground. I've just learned how to kind of go into any situation and make like a pretty interesting visual photo out of any situation. So learning how to pre-visualize, anticipating moments. And so then, I was still very much trying to figure out what I was doing when writer Chelsea Conaboy and I started what ended up being about 2 years for the newspaper covering the St. Pierre family. And we did 15 pages of print altogether, and I pulled a few to share because it's kind of nice to see the original work in the original context. So these three PDFs are all from the first piece, the first story we did, which is really what paved the way to access and future stories because Carolyn felt like this first story really represented her experience well. And that was really helpful having the work run in installments. One of the things that I struggled with initially and still do is this, I think photography can often be a taking profession, and the language sort of upholds that, how we take pictures. Um, and I think that for me, the relationship with the St. Pierre family was pretty symbiotic at the beginning, and that was super helpful for me. Rich knew that stories in the local paper would help him in his battle against the insurance company who didn't want to pay for like her experimental treatments. So there's that portion of it, and then also we had agreed that once all the stories were published, that I would share all of the photographs, like just give them this archive of everything I had shot. So then he would have this document for the kids. So Rich, the father, had lost his mother when he was 7, and he really didn't have many photos of her. And that was a big driving force, as he knew that this family archive would be really valuable to the kids later. So as I said, we did these 5 stories in installments over time, and we would just pitch a new story when we had enough material. And even though, we were working in a very supportive newsroom, we still had editors think that this was like too personal of a story and like, should we really give this much like print real estate to one family? But we kept pushing and learned how to advocate for ourselves in the story we were telling. And then after the series won a Pulitzer, we got, and this was even pretty early internet, almost pre-internet, but still got reactions from people from around the world, and it really helped cement that lesson to me that oftentimes the most personal can also be the most universal. So Chelsea, the writer, and I were in the room when Carolyn died, with a few other members of the family, and it was really just such a profound experience and truly life-changing. And I had so much respect for how Rich and the family really just embraced as much as they could the experience and tried to handle it. You know, not in this like I feel like oftentimes in this American culture we deal with death behind closed doors and we don't really talk about it and it's sort of hidden. And Rich's approach was sort of the opposite. And so they were like, the kids were living life while Carolyn was, was dying. And it was a very kind of natural, um, I found loving experience. And so I really learned so much from that and wanted to share that with the readers. So we published this story 2 days after Carolyn died. And it's interesting, showing these PDFs because they're sort of like this odd time capsule in and of themselves. This is, Obama running for president early on. And, I feel a little less comfortable with it now. I mean, the design and the ads. Um, I think my work now is more restrained, and I find that there's a different level of reverence to the book form, which I appreciate, um, and feel more comfortable with. But I think it's also really important these community journalism outlets, newspapers, and the work that the stories that they get out there. So it's nice to show that as well. So the last two installments we actually published after she had died. And I really felt strongly about continuing the story after Carolyn was gone because I had a sense that that the family would need the most support after she was gone. And I really wanted to I felt like I hadn't really seen that story and I didn't really know what that was like, the process of dealing with grief and moving on and refiguring the family. And so that was one of the things that I was really interested in and still am, I guess. So, a little bit about the access. I think it's really important to note that, Rich and Carolyn never would have agreed to this at the onset. It was really just a slow build of the relationship that paved the way for intimate storytelling like this and other pieces that are similar. And we really worked hard to make them feel like they had control and, respect as to when we were there and what we would share and, tried to be just so sensitive and disarming every time we were there with the family. So along with the five print stories, we also did an 18-minute multimedia piece. And I don't really have time to show it, but if anybody's interested, I definitely recommend you find time to watch it. It's really goes into the much deeper into the end of life and the dynamics of the family at the time. This is planting trees on Mother's Day. So all of this original work, which was made in 2006, 2008, I see as like a prologue for the project now. So, as Judy mentioned, I moved away right around this time and first was traveling to other newspapers and then eventually freelancing. And the two older kids went to school and began their lives. And so it was really just Rich and EJ for many years. Rich bought a boat, which he'd wanted to do for a long time. And I had felt this level of intimacy and closeness with Carolyn's family that I hadn't even really experienced with my own. And, it's funny, like I do identify like as a queer artist and I see things through that lens, but most of my work isn't about queerness or necessarily the queer community. So it's nice to be invited and included during Pride Month. But thinking about if there is like sort of a angle with this story is, uh, I think being a queer person, family is very malleable, and it's the like chosen family versus, your blood family is not, family doesn't have to be blood, and I think that working with them definitely cemented that in my mind. And I think that it's probably not a coincidence that um, that a queer photographer kind of ended up telling this story. So anyway, so I didn't want to just like move on and lose touch with them. And so for a while I would just visit during summer vacations and have my camera, which was like when this photograph was made. But after a few more years, it became more intentional, and I started making more regular trips back to New Hampshire to document them. And I didn't really know what I was doing. I was just sort of figuring it out as I went along. But I had an idea I wanted to do a book. So I started to kind of talk about that a little bit and work toward that mentally. So the story evolved to center EJ and also Rich. And as I said, like we had become really close, and Rich was with me in New York at the Pulitzer Award ceremony. He flew to California for my wedding. So I definitely we had a relationship beyond the story at this point. But from the beginning, in my mind, EJ was really this powerful figure. He was the youngest of the kids. He was a bit of a blank slate to me in a way. Like he was the one who was least likely to have any direct memories of Carolyn. And I didn't really know who he was going to become. Like he was comfortable with me being around and photographing, but he wasn't really too affected by it. We didn't really have a history that he knew about, right? Because he was so young. And a large part of my decision to leave newspapers was to be able to have the freedom to work on projects like this. It was just too hard to figure out how to fly across the country and photograph when I had a full-time job. And from California, 3,000 miles away, like I couldn't even without the newspaper, I couldn't be there for these big moments, right? I couldn't be there spontaneously or, um, I, so it was initially out of necessity that I really had to change my approach to this story. And I would try to time trips to like milestones or events in their life. But really, I just am at the mercy of whatever they happen to be doing when I'm in town. And I'm actually flying out tomorrow. I haven't been there this year yet, so I'm going to spend a few days this weekend and next week photographing them. But so this photograph was made in the summer of 2013, right after I'd left newspapers, when EJ was 11. And it was actually, this photograph was made on Carolyn's birthday, which you wouldn't know unless you read like the title of the photograph. So, really trying to make images that elevate beyond the literal changes in their lives and a little bit more quiet in between moments. So later that same year, Rich started a new family with a woman named Kim, and ultimately it didn't last, but EJ's teen years were spent with Kim and Rich. And Kim has two daughters who really became EJ's sisters. And I also like to, note that EJ has this massive extended family, and they're really only hinted at in the project. And that's mostly because I had to really simplify characters, and I've really tried to focus on EJ. But I also I see this project as about EJ, but also not about him, and have come to accept that both of those things can be true. So when EJ was in middle school and high school, he was living with Kim in a smaller town in New Hampshire with much more of a rural community vibe. And he wasn't into hunting per se, but there was lots of gun-related recreation. And with the project now, I mean, I definitely see rural New Hampshire as a main character. And I'm really fascinated by how geographic places shape us. And I see that so clearly in EJ and the person he's becoming. So this is a picture from target practice. And I like this photograph because it's it's kind of a violent image, right? But it's also like surprisingly feminine. The shape of the cut in the can, and it's pomegranate flavored, which is pomegranates often symbolize fertility and life, which I thought was interesting and kind of helped keep that photo in the mix after all these years. But yeah, so one of the things I try to do is subtly show Carolyn's absence and am often thinking while I'm there photographing, like, how does someone's presence linger after they're gone? So one of the things that I love about documentary work is when I'm like the most patient and the most in the moment. There's really sort of a zen-ness to it. And I've come to realize, especially with this project, that the time you spend not making photographs is just as important as the time you spend making them. So over the years, I've probably spent dozens of hours just sitting there watching EJ fish. So as I mentioned, my college training in photography was more like fine art based. And over the years, I've been working my way back there and try to make images that are kind of have a looser interpretation, a little bit more metaphoric, because I want the viewer to be able to interpret and project themselves and their own experience onto the work. So this series bridged both my careers, as a journalist and as an artist. And those worlds are both very important to me and continually inform each other. So another challenge with the project is to keep the work consistent after all these years because I continue to stretch and grow visually and I'm changing, just like EJ is. And so weaving in landscapes and details really helps with that. So when this project became more and more about EJ, um, I started to, monitor my expectations and um, really respect the tenuous nature of it. Particularly when EJ was a teenager, I was, terrified that I would just fly back to New Hampshire and he would just, in so many ways, communicate that he just was not interested in being around me or having me photograph him or, something like that. And, change is so rapid during that time that a year can be an eternity. And it was often, a year between my visits. But every trip I'd find that we'd pick right back up and where we'd left off, and I would just feel such a sense of relief and gratitude that he was still open and willing to be part of this. So this is EJ doing his eighth grade science project after a high school track meet. So EJ doesn't really remember anything about the early part of this project, and until recently, he's never really expressed interest or curiosity about the initial stories, which I find really interesting. How that's kind of irrelevant to him. So he also doesn't remember a time when I haven't been photographing him. So me being around, coming to town, photographing him is just something he's always known. It's just always been part of his life. So I'm kind of like, a family friend or like a long distance aunt who comes to town. But that relationship is really fascinating to me. So as I mentioned, the work now I see as a meditation on time and looking for markers of time, symbols of how we spend our time, also the time that since Carolyn's been gone. So I remember when Rich bought this car new, and it was a point of pride when he put 300,000 miles on it. And it eventually became EJ's first car. So I've been able to witness the whole cycle. And though the project centers on EJ, Rich has always been this huge driving force, and his support has really kept it going. And just been like this, none of this would have happened if it wasn't for Rich's support and belief in this work. So now that EJ has gotten older, I've started doing more like pose portraits of them, which is sort of funny too, looking back on like my early newspaper days. My greatest fear was like portraits. I did not want to have to like direct anybody. It was just so uncomfortable to me. But now it's like the bulk of my paid photography is portraits. And I do a lot of mostly editorial work for newspapers and magazines. So about 5 years ago, I started sending book proposals to publishers and ended up working with a small place called Gost, which is London-based independent photo book publisher with a strong reputation in the photo book world. And we released this in the fall of 2023. So kept the original title from the newspaper series. Um, I've always kind of had mixed feelings about the title, but Carolyn really loved it, and it felt like important to keep it. So sort of zooming out over time, working on the book, I was able to go back and re-edit and pick up on other themes um, that sort of fed into the narrative. And so this toy octopus, EJ carried with him to this first day of kindergarten. And yes, it is a toy. Sometimes people ask me, I often get asked if it's real or not. But I made this picture the night before Carolyn died. And when I went back and was looking at some of the early work, I found it and pulled it back into the edit for the book. Um, and it's been an important part of EJ's um, evolution. So he last year he graduated with a degree in marine biology. So it's been a lifelong interest of his. And I turned 44 when I was putting the book together, which was the same age Carolyn was when she died, and felt very significant to me. This snapshot of Rich's, one that he had taken right just a few months, I think, before I met them, is one that I've always loved. And we opened the book with it. So EJ sleeping becomes this thread throughout the book, beginning with that previous snapshot and then this image that I took in 2015. So then I photographed EJ sleeping as a way to punctuate the book narrative and mark time of his growing up. And I think there's like an innocence and inherent vulnerability in these scenes, which I'm really drawn to. And I also like the connection that sleeping has with dreaming and memory. And a curator I admire once pointed out that when you sleep is when you heal. This is EJ and his girlfriend on a date by the Merrimack River. So I often like to think of this work as me sort of popping in and creating these little visual dispatches of EJ growing up that I'd send back to Carolyn. And then this is a little Easter egg nod to my Concord Monitor days, and sort of sad balloons, the feeling of let down after a celebration. And at one point, when Rich and I were going through some old family photos and documents, we came across this drawing EJ had done as a child, and I took a picture of it because I really loved it. And I like the idea of like EJ's own self-portraits are surrounded by fish, and it ended up being the winning idea for the cover. The publisher had the idea to move the octopus to the back, which I loved. And I chose the fabric on the book cloth to echo the family couch, which was also like sort of this recurring motif and so central to their daily life. So this is one of the spreads. This is EJ on a date at an exotic pet store. Yeah, so the regular edition of the book is sold out, but there are a couple copies of a special edition that come with a signed numbered print, and they're still available on my website.
I've got a copy of this in our photo building. My copy I brought down for because we use it in one of my in a couple of the classes that I teach, Preston. So if y'all want to see it, stop by 6107. I've got it.
Excellent, great. Yes, I do trust that there's some copies floating around that people can access. And when I do, in-person talks, I obviously have copies with me that people can check out. So Richard Linklater's film Boyhood came out about a year or two after I left newspapers and when I started to seriously like photograph EJ again. And the film was really well received and it helped kind of give me confidence that this idea that I had, that I was on the right track. Let's see if I can get this to play. Okay. Yeah, so both the film Boyhood and Michael Apted's Up series were significant early inspirations for me for this work. And I borrowed this idea of yearly headshots from Linkletter, and it's one of the like kind of side projects that I do just for the family. Um, so we've like printed out, 10 years of them or something, and Rich has it hanging in his house. And in addition to the yearly headshots, I frequently do audio interviews with both EJ and Rich. And I used excerpts of those as text in the back of the book. And I wanted to share one of these quotes. This is Rich and I talking during the week of EJ's high school graduation and Eagle Scout celebration. Okay, so Rich says, like you're here this week, significant events are happening. She would have loved to have seen all this. And if she had lived, you and I wouldn't be here. So this relationship, the other relationships that were fostered, there are all these branches that occurred after her death, or they were building while she was dying. So this is from that high school graduation. EJ and his other 2020 grads, social distancing before the ceremony. He was really lucky to get a ceremony. Um, so we decided to end the book narrative right around the point of his graduation and before he left home. And so now I want to show you a few photos that are more recent, unpublished, that are sort of part of this next chapter of the series, which began when EJ left home. And it took a few surprising turns. Obviously, there was the pandemic and the lockdowns. This is EJ in the University of New Hampshire dining hall. They built, these plexiglass cubicles. I'm sure a lot of you guys had similar experiences. But it made him look like he was in a fish tank. And I thought that was sort of a surprising way that the marine life sort of tied back. But then the other big surprise was around the time I was finalizing the book, EJ enlisted in the New Hampshire Air National Guard. So he wanted to ease the financial burdens of college and follow in his father's footsteps. And Rich had been, really talking up the blue collar job training that the military provides. So, paying for college tuition was kind of an immediate struggle for them. And so EJ became part of this like economic draft. This is a shooting range at Lackland Air Force Base in Texas. So I was able to go to EJ's basic military training. And sort of a fun fact, getting access to EJ in college during the height of the pandemic was actually harder than getting access to him at boot camp. So basic military training is like, very strict environment, and enlistees aren't allowed Oh, well, for the enlistees, it's very strict. And so when I was negotiating access, they had said like I couldn't talk to EJ, and I had agreed not to make it obvious that I was photographing EJ, that I would do sort of general coverage and I was photographing other people. And I only found out weeks later when EJ was done with this that that his whole unit had known, like the day before I showed up, that they had sort of berated him and given him a hard time about like if he was famous and why this photographer was coming to photograph. So I was pretending not to focus on him, and then apparently everyone else knew what I was doing. So many guns, so many different ways. And EJ is a free thinker and he believes in gun control. Last time we talked about it. But yet he seems constantly surrounded by guns. So one of the ongoing challenges with this project is how to fund these increasingly expensive trips back to New Hampshire, which I make about twice a year. And grants are awesome, but usually few and far between. So these trips, the work is mostly self-funded, and I pay, fund it through like licensing fees, or occasionally I'll get like a well-paying commercial gig. So it's all just part of this like, hustle of my professional life and my art practice. And there's a lot of sacrifices, that I think I've made from leaving full-time jobs and not having a steady paycheck. But for me, it's a trade-off and it's just too important for me. And I feel very fortunate to be able to make this work, and also have a wife who gets company subsidized health insurance, which also makes this possible. So I did get a grant from an organization called Working Assumptions, which funded this trip last summer to EJ's 157th Civil Engineer Squadron training at Fort Indiantown Gap in Pennsylvania. So I got to spend a couple days watching EJ build portable shower and shave units and kind of getting a peek into the whole like military industrial complex. And the economy has been, just really hard for them despite the military and Rich's full-time job. They had to sell their boat last year, which was sad. And they're definitely part of this like sort of squeezed middle class. This is another family photo of theirs from the time Rich was in the Guard. So in this new work, which I hope will be a book in the next couple of years, um, I find it impossible to separate EJ's lived experience from the current social and political climate. And I'm fascinated by these familial and social forces that shape us and our place within history. And creatively, I really love how all of this is happening in real time, and I have no idea or control, obviously, over who EJ will become. And I'm just open to the story being whatever it is. And, bearing witness to EJ growing up still seems like the best way to honor Carolyn. And EJ also sees it as a tribute to her, that we're continuing this living document. Okay, thank you guys so much.
Preston,
Let's
every
see.
time I hear you talk about this, I learn more, right? Every time. And it's been almost 20 years, right?
Yeah, I know. I always feel a little bad for people who've had to sit through these
No, are you kidding?
before.
I could just keep going, I love it. I love it.
Thank you.
It's such a powerful body of work. And I want to just throw out to everyone that she has other powerful body. I mean, she's been working on how long now? 20?
20.
20, my God. But she has, very amazing bodies of work other than this, but this has definitely been the seminal body that I've had the like privilege of being able to watch evolve. Having said that, do you all have questions for Preston that we could hear? You can either raise your hand or just say it out. Iris says, thank you so much for your time.
Wow.
She was so inspired by you. Iris, as well, as a very amazing documentary photographer.
Oh.
Um, Anybody have a question? Well, I do. Um,
Okay. Yeah.
so EJ, right?
Mm-hmm.
Still dating anybody? Like
Yes.
the same
He
girl with the snake, or is it a different person?
Same girl, yeah. They broke up for a couple of years, but now they're back together. And yeah, I mean, it seemed to be going well. She just graduated from college. And yeah, I'm excited. I'm going back, like I said, tomorrow, so I'll be with them this weekend, which will be fun
In New Hampshire
in
or
New Hampshire.
yeah, okay. Pretty amazing, right? And then I wanted to ask too, so obviously you're building enough work for another book, right? Are you going to be approaching Gost for that as well? Or are you going to shop? How's that work when you do a
Yeah,
sequel? I've not seen that very often.
I would love to work with Gost again
Mhm.
for this next chapter, and see if I can talk him into doing a reprint, possibly of the first one, so people could get both. Um, yeah, it was great working with him, and I like that continuity, that idea of like a chapterized project.
Yeah, very interesting. Amazing student Dag has a question. Hi.
Hey, so I had a question. I know you photograph EJ a lot, but when you photograph a picture or something, do you plan it out first, or do you like just go with the flow? Are you like a spontaneous person? Like, I was just curious about that.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. Yeah, I think because this work started originally when I was at newspapers, that I have this sort of photojournalistic approach to it still. So it's mostly just all like just on the flow, like spontaneous. We will do like more structured portraits, which I don't know how much there's pre-visualized, but where I will sort of direct him like that last image of him in his uniform, kind of leaning back. That was he was getting ready to go to the base to report to the base, and it was really early in the morning, so it was that beautiful like early morning sunlight coming in. And he had a couple of minutes, and I was like, "Oh, why don't you sit right here in this chair?" And I noticed the shadow, and yeah, so I will direct some, but it's the most of it, yeah, it's just kind of whatever happens to be going on.
Thank you so much, Daggy, for the question, and Preston for the great answer. Alaya, what do you got for us?
Yeah, so great work by the way. Like I loved how you used lighting so much in your pictures. It really like sorry, it like showed the emotion really well. But
Oh.
I had a question of like what brought you into portraits because I know you said that you used to like not feel comfortable with
Mhm.
directing people, and I also feel the same way. Like I don't really like taking portraits because I feel like there's really not much I can do with it. So I just want to know like what brought you into that realm.
Great
Yeah,
question.
I think it was just practice. I mean, at a certain point, I was just forced to. I couldn't avoid it. And then, with this project, so, when EJ was little, Rich was always with him, and it was really easy to get photographs of the two of them together because they were just always interacting. But now they're like these two adults, and they'll like kind of have conversations, but it's not the same kind of closeness, dynamic interacting that happens when you're younger. And so a lot of times the only way to get them both in the same frame is to just say, hey, let's go do some portraits and then position them. Yeah, and it's still tricky. EJ's great. And I guess people have said that I've just ended up training him because we've been doing this so long, he kind of knows what to do. But Rich is really tricky to work with because he gets self-conscious and he kind of giggles and he's just kind of uncomfortable. But I still make them do it. And I think the more I make them do it, kind of the better. It's just part of the process. And they also sometimes I'll get a portrait of them that it doesn't really fit the story so much, but it's just a nice picture of the two of them. So then I can give them a print of that and
Right.
yeah.
All right. Thank you so much.
Yeah, good
Thanks.
question.
Great question. Anybody else? I've got a question.
I think
So
there's one in the chat
Stephanie's got a
too.
question. Sorry, Stephanie, I was stepping on your question. She says, how much text is at the end of the first book? Will you use parts of the interviews done over time to tell their story in writing as well as photography? Great question.
Yeah. So there's not a lot. So the book opens up with a quote from Carolyn's journal and then goes into photographs, and there's really no text until the end. There's titles, which kind of helps. Basically, I want the text to be like a supplemental narrative. I really want people to like sit down and go through the photos and just experience it visually.
Hmm.
Like I said, sort of be able to interpret it themselves. Um, but then, I think that there are a lot of questions as to how this project started. And so the interview for me um, just fills in some gaps. So, like, ideally, someone will go through, look at all the pictures, then read the text, and then maybe go back and get like another layer of appreciation or be able to see insights, like watching a movie the second time, you pick up on more subtleties. So, yeah, it's very much a photo book to me, and I want to keep it as the primary medium, but also have a little bit of supporting text to help with that.
Yeah, that context can be pretty important, or it can add,
Yeah.
right? Images can stand on their own, as you've seen over time. Great question. Thanks, Stephanie. Olivia asks, how did your relationship with the family affect how you see your photography? Great question. And what it means to you. Do you think this project helped you evolve as a person and also as an artist?
Yeah, it definitely did help. It has helped me evolve a ton as a person. Yes. And as an artist. I'm trying to think. So, I mean, as I've said, just like building that relationship with them, maintaining a relationship, it's just hard to maintain relationships, friendships, family relationships as you get older and there's distance involved. So I think that's been really great. And working with EJ for this sort of like ongoing consent has been really good and helpful for me with interacting with people and making sure they understand that they can tell me something's off the record or they can say, I want you here, but I don't want this to be shown or whatever, just that sort of working with people. And then I'm trying to remember the first part of the question.
Well, so you answered the relationship with the family, how it affected you and your photography, right? And what it means to you. Like,
Yeah,
how
I
did the
mean,
work kind of affect you, not only as an artist in your work, but also as a human? How has this, how has this grown with you or you with it?
yeah, I mean, I think my relationship with them is so important to me personally and photographically.
Hmm.
I definitely count Rich among one of my closest friends.
Hmm.
And um yeah, I mean, and I feel so like indebted to Carolyn and what they gave, them opening up. I actually just worked on another story last week that was around end of life stuff and caretaking. I just think when people really open up and sort of give that experience over to a journalist and then the readers, it's just such a profound gift and it's such a privilege being part of that I just want to give back and be able to do whatever I can to help, just return that gift in some way.
Hmm.
Uh,
Yeah, I think it just seeing and being the witness and seeing everyone has got to be very profound experience, especially by you, because you're such a your energy is so amazing. Like I could, it's very different than other people, right? Not that their energy is bad, but it's just a lot.
mhm.
Mike, I have a question. So what happens if EJ or when EJ, like you managed it when he went to the army, but like they might not always be just hanging out every year. What would you go with EJ then on your visits because he's been this focal point as of late? Or would you have to make a trip to Rich and then go see EJ if they're in different parts of the country? Like what would you
Yeah, no, I've been very lucky in that sense because EJ went to school in New Hampshire. And actually the guard, like because he's in the guard, they will pay for college, but only in state. So
Thank God.
EJ's never more than like an hour away from his father. So it's still
Uh-huh.
kind of tricky, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think eventually I'd have to pivot to EJ, and this shoot next week, I've actually had to talk with EJ a lot more about it, which feels different. But yes, sometimes like when EJ was in college, I would go and see EJ and then try to squeeze in an extra day to hang out with Rich. Um, yeah.
Yeah, cool. I'll be really interested to see how that evolves. Susan has got to take off. She says, really enjoyed hearing your story. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.